At 38, I thought I'd buried the past. Then this morning, 47 missed calls proved me wrong. 22 years after my parents abandoned me at a truck stop as a life lesson, they finally found me. What they discovered about the man I'd become would shatter everything they thought they knew about consequences. I never imagined sharing this story, but after seeing a video about parents teaching their children harsh lessons, something deep within my soul cracked open. I'm 38 now, but I can still taste the diesel fumes and feel that scorching August heat from the day that changed everything. My parents, Harold and Margaret, were disciples of what they called character-building discipline. Growing up, every mistake became a theatrical production of tough love. They'd wake me at 2 in the morning to clean the garage because I'd forgotten to take out the trash, or force me to walk 3 miles to school in a thunderstorm when I missed the bus, even though my mother was driving that exact route for her morning yoga class. That sweltering afternoon began like countless others. We were returning from visiting my older brother Kevin at State University, about 5 hours from our suburban home. I was slouched in the back seat, lost in my music, when Dad's gruff voice cut through my headphones. "David, get me a coffee. Black. And make it quick." I dragged myself from the car, clutching his crumpled $20 bill, and trudged into the dingy convenience store. The elderly clerk looked half dead from the oppressive heat, and naturally, their ancient coffee machine had given up the ghost. I stood there for what felt like an eternity while he prepared a fresh pot, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. When I finally emerged, squinting against the brutal sun, our faded blue Honda was gone. At first, I thought they'd simply moved to a different pump. Then I spotted our car merging onto the interstate, its familiar dented bumper disappearing into the shimmering heat waves. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom, complete with that infuriating smiley face. "Let's see how resourceful you really are. Consider this advanced problem-solving training. We'll see you when you figure it out." I called immediately. Straight to voicemail, every single attempt. After 30 minutes of growing panic, another message arrived. "Don't waste your time calling. Your father believes you need to learn self-reliance. We'll be waiting at home when you earn your way back. Here's what you need to understand about Harold and Margaret. This wasn't their worst offense. 3 years earlier, they'd locked me out during a February blizzard because I'd earned a B- in calculus. Maybe some real-world cold will help you focus on academic excellence," they declared. That night, I'd broken into our storage shed and slept among the lawn equipment. They were livid about the damaged lock and docked my part-time wages at the local hardware store to pay for repairs. Standing in that truck stop parking lot, something fundamental shifted inside me. Or perhaps it finally broke completely. I stared at that steaming coffee cup in my trembling hands and experienced what I can only describe as profound clarity. I was finished. Absolutely finished. I had roughly $230 saved from my summer job at the community recreation center. My backpack was trapped in their car, but I had my wallet, my phone, and something I'd never possessed before, complete certainty about my next move. I returned to that sweltering store and asked the clerk about public transportation. "Greyhound station's about 3 miles west," he said, pointing toward a cluster of buildings wavering in the heat. "You all right, son?" I nodded, though I was anything but all right. I was transforming. Before leaving, I made one crucial phone call to my Aunt Rachel, my mother's younger sister who'd been excommunicated from family gatherings years earlier for what my parents called undermining parental authority by occasionally treating me like a human being rather than a military recruit. She answered on the first ring. "They left you where?" What happened next still moves me to tears. Aunt Rachel, living 4 states away on a teacher's salary, immediately called a local taxi service and purchased my bus ticket online. "Get yourself here, sweetheart. We'll figure out everything else together." My phone continued its relentless buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Mom. "Don't you dare contact Rachel. You'd better start walking home this instant. Your father is beyond disappointed. This rebellious attitude ends today." I blocked their numbers, powered down my phone, and climbed aboard that Greyhound bus. For 7 hours, I watched America roll past my window, endless fields, small towns, highway rest stops, while processing the magnitude of what I'd just done. The expression on their faces when they returned to an empty house must have been something spectacular. I learned later from Kevin that they'd driven back to that truck stop around midnight, absolutely convinced they'd find me sitting there like a repentant child, ready to apologize and accept their wisdom. Instead, they found nothing. They filed a missing person report, but it was quickly dismissed when Aunt Rachel provided documentation of the legal emancipation process she'd already begun. That was 22 years ago. I completed high school living with Aunt Rachel, earned my GED, then pursued certification in electrical work. I built something meaningful from nothing, mastering the art of fixing what others had broken. Eventually, I started Mitchell and Sons Electrical Services, found love with an incredible woman named Jennifer, and raised two daughters who've never experienced a single character-building moment of abandonment or cruelty. I believed that chapter of my existence was permanently closed. Then yesterday, my office phone shattered that illusion. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in over 2 decades. I let it ring, but they'd found me. By evening, I had 47 missed calls and a growing sense that my carefully constructed piece was about to be tested. The first voicemail was Kevin, and he was crying. "David, please pick up. Mom and Dad tracked you down somehow. They're completely losing it. Just call me back, okay? Not them, call me." I sat in my truck in the company parking lot, watching the sunset over the suburban skyline I'd helped wire and light, listening to message after message. Most were from Harold and Margaret, alternating between guilt manipulation and outright demands. "Your mother is seriously ill, and you don't even care. How dare you abandon your family for over 2 decades?" Rich commentary considering their own track record. The final voicemail was Harold, clearly intoxicated. "You think you're something special with your fancy business. We created who you are. You owe us everything." I sat there for a long time, processing emotions I thought I'd buried permanently. Finally, I texted Kevin, "Coffee tomorrow, Riverside Diner on Hamilton. 8 a.m. Come alone, or don't come at all." He appeared looking exactly as I remembered, just weathered by time. Same nervous habit of shredding paper napkins when anxious. "They're losing the house," he blurted before even sitting down. "Dad's been gambling online for years. Mom's maxed out every credit card they could get. They found your company's website last month and convinced themselves you owe them financial rescue." I poured cream into my coffee with steady hands. "Tell me everything." The story that emerged was both predictable and heartbreaking. They'd been monitoring my business's social media presence for months, Harold becoming increasingly convinced that my success was somehow his creation, something I owed them for their investment in my character development. They needed $87,000 to prevent foreclosure. Kevin kept apologizing, explaining how he'd tried to prevent them from contacting me. "Why should I help them?" I asked quietly. He started crying then, telling me about Harold's drinking escalating, Margaret's shopping addiction spiraling completely out of control, how they blamed everyone except themselves for their predicament. "They're still our parents," he whispered desperately. "No," I replied with absolute certainty. "They stopped being my parents at that truck stop 22 years ago. The difference between you and me, Kevin, is that you're still hoping they'll change into the people they never were." My phone buzzed, Margaret calling again. I declined and pulled out my wallet. "I'm paying for breakfast. After today, block my number. Whatever happens next, don't contact me again. David, please, I mean it. You're my brother, and I love you, but I'm not your solution to their problems. Let them face the consequences of their choices." I was halfway to my truck when Kevin chased after me. "They're coming to your office," he shouted. "Tomorrow morning." Mom found the address online. I tried to stop them, I swear. I nodded calmly. "Good. Let them come." I drove back to my office to discover 32 new voicemails. Apparently, they'd been calling every relative, painting me as a heartless son who'd abandoned his family and now refused to help in their darkest hour. Classic manipulation tactics from the same playbook they'd used my entire childhood. But here's what Harold and Margaret didn't know. I'd spent the last 24 hours making calls of my own. Turns out, their mortgage was held by Riverside Community Bank, an institution I'd worked with extensively over the years. They were 4 months behind on payments, and foreclosure proceedings had already begun. Tomorrow morning, they'd walk into my office thinking they held all the leverage, believing they could shame me, manipulate me, force me to become their retirement plan. They had no concept of what was coming. I'd scheduled an early meeting with my attorney, and by the time they arrived, everything would be legally positioned. They wanted to see what I'd made of myself. Perfect. Let them witness exactly who their son had become and what happens when you push someone too far for too long. I wasn't that terrified 16-year-old anymore. I wasn't running, and I was finished playing nice. The next morning, I was reviewing contracts when Jennifer, our office manager, called my extension. David, there's a couple here insisting on seeing you. They claim to be your parents. My stomach clenched, but I'd been preparing for this moment. Send them up. It's time to finish this. Through the glass walls of my office, I watched Harold and Margaret make their entrance. They looked older, diminished somehow. Harold's signature mustache had gone completely gray, and Margaret's artificially blonde hair couldn't disguise the deep lines etched around her eyes. They were wearing what I recognized as their church clothes, the same inexpensive dress Margaret wore to Sunday services and Harold's ill-fitting brown suit that had never properly fit his frame. The moment they entered my office, Margaret erupted into theatrical tears. Not quiet weeping, full dramatic sobbing. My precious boy, look at you. All grown up and successful. She lunged forward for an embrace. I stepped back smoothly. Let's keep this professional, I said, gesturing toward the chairs. State your business. Harold puffed up with that familiar pompous air he'd always assumed before launching into his lectures. Now son, is that any way to address your mother after all these years? Cut the performance, I interrupted coldly. You didn't spend 22 years searching for me because you missed family dinners. You found me because you need something. What is it? Margaret's crying intensified dramatically. How can you be so cruel? We made one tiny mistake. I laughed. Not a pleasant sound. A mistake. You abandoned your 16-year-old son at a truck stop 300 miles from home as entertainment. Then you drove away laughing, saying, let's see how long it takes him to crawl back home. That wasn't a mistake. That was the final straw after years of your twisted games. We came back for you, Harold shouted, standing abruptly. We drove back after 2 hours, but you'd vanished. Yes, I was gone, I replied evenly, and I stayed gone. Best decision I ever made. I pulled out my phone and pressed record. Now state your business clearly, or leave my office. The truth came pouring out between Margaret's theatrical sobs and Harold's increasingly desperate explanations. They'd mortgaged the house for Harold's guaranteed investment opportunity, some online cryptocurrency scheme that had predictably collapsed. Now they were 6 months behind on payments, and the bank was proceeding with foreclosure. They needed $215,000 to save their home. You've done so well for yourself, Margaret whimpered, gesturing around my office. Surely you can help your own parents. I let them finish their complete presentation. Then I opened my desk drawer and withdrew a manila folder. Interesting that you mentioned the house, I said calmly, because when I learned you were looking for me, I did some research. Found out about the foreclosure situation. So I had my company purchase your mortgage debt from Riverside Community Bank. The silence was exquisite. Their faces transformed from confusion to shock to pure terror. What? What does that mean? Harold's voice had lost all its bluster. It means you have 45 days to vacate the property. Mitchell & Sons Electrical acquired it legally at auction last week. We're demolishing it next month for a new residential development project. Margaret began wailing like a wounded animal. Harold's face turned purple with rage. You can't do this. That's our home. Like the truck stop was mine, I replied quietly. At least I'm giving you 45 days. You gave me 45 seconds. Harold lunged across my desk. I remained perfectly still as building security rushed in. I'd arranged for them to be standing by. As they escorted my parents out, Margaret screamed that I was evil, that I'd burn in hell. Harold threatened lawsuits he couldn't afford. I simply watched through the glass as they were removed from my building, still recording everything. My phone buzzed immediately, a text from Kevin. They just called me hysterical. What did you do? I typed back. Exactly what they taught me to do. Look out for myself. I'd spent 22 years building myself up from nothing. Now I was going to use everything I'd learned to tear down the house that was never really a home. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. After purchasing their house at auction legally through my company, Harold and Margaret completely lost their remaining sanity. They began calling every single relative, spinning tales about their ungrateful son, throwing them onto the streets. What they didn't expect was that I had evidence of everything. Remember those old phones that could record calls? I'd kept one from that day at the truck stop. had their cruel laughter recorded as they drove away, saying, "Let's see how long it takes him to crawl back home." I'd also preserved 22 years of documented emotional abuse. Birthday cards with charming messages like, "Maybe if you weren't such a disappointment," saved voicemails, text messages, everything meticulously organized. Yesterday morning, I sent a mass email to our entire extended family. Every single relative received that recording, saw those cards, read those messages. By noon, Kevin called me, sobbing. Turns out, dear Harold and Margaret had been rewriting history for decades. They'd told everyone I'd run away because of drug problems, a complete fabrication. But here's where karma became truly poetic. Remember how I said I was demolishing their house? I did exactly that. Had all the permits ready, called them to witness their precious home being reduced to rubble. They arrived with Aunt Rachel, thinking she'd talk sense into me. Instead, they got front row seats to watching their life's work disappear. Margaret screamed about her prize-winning garden. Harold threatened lawsuits with money he didn't have. I stood there drinking my morning coffee, watching them lose everything they'd built while they experienced the helplessness they'd once inflicted on me. The look on their faces when the bulldozer crushed Margaret's rose garden was absolutely priceless. But I wasn't finished. That land sits in a developing area with excellent potential. Instead of some luxury development, I'm building affordable housing, 32 units with reasonable rent, priority given to single parents and their children. I've already got the plans approved and construction starting next month. The most meaningful part. I'm naming it Rachel Gardens, after my aunt who saved me when I was 16. She passed away last year, but she'd love knowing her name graces something that helps people escape impossible situations. Harold and Margaret tried rallying the neighbors against my project, showing them childhood photos of our happy family. Unfortunately for them, those neighbors remembered hearing me crying at night for years. One of them, Mrs. Patterson, actually hugged me and said she'd always regretted not calling Child Protective Services. This morning brought the final confrontation. They came to my office again, this time humble and apologetic. Harold actually wept, real tears, not Margaret's theatrical performance, saying they were about to become homeless. Margaret promised she'd forgive me if I just helped them out of their predicament. I let them talk for 15 minutes straight, then I handed them a rental application for one of the new units. Told them they were welcome to apply like anyone else, but they'd need references and a clean credit check. "But we're your parents," Margaret screamed. Harold launched into his familiar speech about, "After everything we've done for you." I smiled genuinely for the first time in their presence. "Yes, after everything you've done, this is exactly what you deserve." The demolition crew starts at 6 a.m. tomorrow. Don't forget to collect your garden gnomes. They're still calling constantly. Kevin tells me they're staying at some budget motel, threatening legal action they can't afford. Good luck with that. Everything I did was completely legal. Their house comes down tomorrow, and I'm planning to live stream it for the entire family to witness. You know what's remarkable? For years, I fantasized about revenge, imagined elaborate scenarios of payback. But in the end, simply allowing them to face the natural consequences of their actions feels more satisfying than anything I could have planned. They discarded their son over a cruel prank, and now they get to watch as everything they built gets torn down to help people they would have looked down upon. Tomorrow, I'm bringing lawn chairs and fresh coffee to watch their house disappear. The irony isn't lost on me. I'll be drinking the same coffee I bought that day at the truck stop, watching their world crumble just as mine did 22 years ago. Some people say I'm being too harsh, that family deserves forgiveness. To them I say, try being abandoned at a truck stop at 16 and see how forgiving you feel. Blood doesn't excuse abuse, and trust me, the truck stop was just the beginning of their cruelty. Rachel Gardens will stand as a monument to the truth that sometimes the best way to honor those who saved us is to save others in return. Tomorrow, their house becomes rubble. Next month, that same ground will shelter families who need a second chance. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that actions have consequences, even if they take 22 years to arrive. Harold and Margaret taught me that life is about survival and self-reliance. They just never expected me to learn those lessons quite so well.